Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at how Satan went from like this perfect being to, well, the embodiment of evil.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? Like, how does that even happen?
It is. And we'll be looking at the biblical texts of Isaiah and Ezekiel to try to get some answers.
Yeah, those are really good sources for this. They give a really fascinating look at how this all went down.
Okay, so like where should we start? What's the first thing we need to understand about this whole like fall from grace thing?
I think the first thing is we got to understand just how amazing Satan was at the beginning.
Okay, so paint the picture for me. Like, what do these texts actually say about him?
Okay, so he was created flawless, just radiant with beauty and filled with wisdom. He was in this like really prominent position in God's realm.
Wow. Okay, so like not just some random angel, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
This guy was like top tier.
Exactly. And Ezekiel, he actually goes into a lot of detail about
Yeah.
like how magnificent Satan was. Like he describes him being adorned with all these precious stones.
Oh, wow. Really? Like what kind of stones are we talking about here?
Oh, like carnelian, chrysolite, emerald, topaz, um, onyx, jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, beryl, you name it. And they were all set in gold.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty vivid picture. Like, what do you think all this detail tells us? Why did Ezekiel go to such lengths to, describe all this?
Well, I think it's like he was really trying to emphasize just how high the stakes were.
Yeah.
We're not talking about like some minor slip up. This was a being of extraordinary stature who chose to rebel.
I see. Yeah, it makes the fall that much more dramatic.
Right, exactly. And that's where the whole idea of pride comes in.
Okay, so pride is like the key to understanding all this.
Well, both Isaiah and Ezekiel, they kind of suggest that it was pride stemming from his beauty and wisdom. That was Satan's undoing. But it's not just about, simple vanity.
So it's more complicated than just like he was really into himself.
Yeah, much more.
Okay, so what's the deeper meaning here? Like, what are these texts trying to tell us about pride and like why it was so destructive for a being like Satan?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
Was it a thirst for power? A rejection of God's authority? Or did he start to believe that, like, his brilliance was even, like, better than divine wisdom?
So many possibilities.
I know, right? And the texts invite us to really think about all those nuances of pride and how it can warp even the most extraordinary beings.
It's scary to think about, honestly. Like how pride can twist your thinking even when you're, supposedly perfect.
Absolutely. And when you look at the scale of this rebellion, it gets even more intense.
What do you mean?
Well, Satan managed to convince a third of the angels to join him.
Whoa, a third. That's a lot of angels.
It was a full-blown cosmic upheaval.
It's like, it makes you wonder what those angels were thinking. Were they all just as, like, consumed by pride as Satan was, or were they, like, tricked somehow?
Yeah, it's a great question. Were they misled? Were there promises of power or a whole new order?
Yeah, like, seduced by this,
Wow.
charismatic leader, maybe.
That's a really interesting thought because, this brings up all these questions about free will and temptation, even in, like, a celestial realm.
Okay, yeah, so were they choosing to follow Satan, knowing what might happen, or were they, like, victims of this whole situation?
Exactly, and theologians have debated this for centuries.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does, and then, there's the biggest question of all.
Yeah, like, where did evil itself come from?
Right.
That's the one.
If God is all good and all powerful, how could he let this rebellion happen in the first place?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. And that's where we have to grapple with some like really deep theological questions about, God, good, evil, the whole thing.
Okay, so I guess that's what we're going to tackle next then.
That's right. We're diving into those deep theological waters.
This sounds intense.
It is, but it's fascinating too.
All right, well, let's do it. Yeah, it's like if God knew this was going to happen, why not just, stop it?
Right. Well, it's the classic problem, right? Like, how can God be all powerful if evil exists? And to understand that, we really got to get into like the whole concept of free will.
Okay, yeah, free will. What does that mean exactly in like this context?
So basically, it's this idea that God gave his creations, the angels and later us humans, the ability to make real choices.
Yep.
Choices to like love him, to obey him, but also to, disobey or even reject him.
So it's like even a perfect being God can't create perfect beings without giving them the option to mess up.
That's a really, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Like a built-in risk factor, kind of?
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess some would say that's like the price you pay for real love, right? You can't force someone to love you.
Right, it has to be a choice.
Yeah.
A freely given choice.
But okay, that still doesn't really explain like why there's so much suffering in the world, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be kinder of God to just like not create beings who might end up choosing to, suffer?
I mean, that's a totally fair point. And that leads to some, like, really different theological ideas, right?
Okay.
Some people think that all the good stuff, love, beauty, everything we see in creation,
Yeah.
that all that potential good outweighs the risk of evil.
Okay, so like it's worth it, basically.
Yeah, like the potential good is worth the risk of bad stuff happening.
I see.
But then there are other folks who say that, maybe God's plan is just way more complicated than we can even understand.
Like we can't even wrap our heads around it.
Right.
So even the suffering, like it has a purpose we just don't get.
Exactly. We're just not seeing the full picture.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
It is. It is.
No easy answers, that's for sure.
Nope. And I mean, these are the questions that people have been debating for centuries, right? Free will, evil, the nature of God, it's all connected.
Like a giant tangled knot.
Exactly.
It's fascinating, but man, it's definitely mind-bending.
It is. I totally agree.
But, getting back to Satan's fall specifically,
Yeah.
I think it's important to like remember the human element in all this.
Oh, absolutely.
Because even though it's this, cosmic story about angels and rebellion and all that, there's still a message that like really speaks to us as people.
Oh, for sure.
And I guess that goes back to what we were saying about pride being at the heart of it all.
Exactly. As epic as Satan's story is, it's also this really powerful warning about the dangers of pride and temptation.
Right. And those aren't just like, abstract theological ideas.
Oh, no, not at all.
They're things that like we all deal with in our own lives.
Every single day. Yeah.
So even if we're not, trying to lead an angelic rebellion, we can still fall into the same traps.
That's exactly the point. How often do we put our own desires, our ego ahead of other people?
Yeah, all the time probably.
Well, right. And how often are we like tempted by power, by wanting to be recognized, or just, doing things our own way, even if it might hurt someone else?
That's like you're reading my mind.
Well, it's human nature, right?
I guess so, but you're right. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of like Satan's fall.
It's the same thing, just on a different scale.
So it really brings it down to like a personal level.
Yeah, that's the key. Satan's story is this mirror, it's showing us our own hearts, and it challenges us to like really look at our own weaknesses.
Okay, so we're all vulnerable to pride and temptation, basically.
We are, and we need to be aware of that.
But if even Satan, who is supposedly this perfect being, fell for it, what hope do we have? Are we just like doomed to repeat his mistakes?
Not at all. Actually, the Bible gives us a pretty powerful antidote to pride.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's humility.
Humility.
And that's where we can find some real practical stuff for our own lives.
All right, I'm all ears. So what does real humility look like? And how do we actually, make it part of our lives?
Well, the first thing is we need to understand what humility isn't. It's not about putting yourself down or pretending you're not good at anything.
Right, right.
It's about being honest with yourself, recognizing what you're good at, but also your limitations.
So like knowing your place in the universe, basically.
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture, understanding that we're all connected, and realizing that real strength often comes from admitting you need help sometimes.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Like it takes the pressure off.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to like be this perfect person all the time. You can just be yourself.
It makes you, I think it makes you more open to learning from others too.
Yeah, for sure. When you're not so focused on yourself, you can actually see what other people have to offer.
Exactly.
And it probably makes it easier to resist temptation, right?
Yeah.
Like when you know you're not, invincible.
Yeah, definitely. When you realize you've got weaknesses, you're less likely to fall for those, promises of power and stuff.
And you're more likely to ask for help.
Right. You're more likely to lean on your community and realize you need, something bigger than yourself.
So like, practically speaking, how do we actually get more humble?
That's the real question, right?
Yeah, it's one thing to understand it, but it's another thing to actually like live it.
Right. And there are a lot of different ways, It's a lifelong process, really.
Yeah, I can see that.
But I think one of the most powerful things is gratitude.
Gratitude.
Yeah.
Okay, so like being thankful for what you have.
Exactly. When you focus on the good things in your life, it kind of shifts your perspective.
Makes sense.
It reminds you that you're not like the only one responsible for everything good that happens.
And it helps you see that you're like connected to other people.
It does. It does. And it also makes you less, self-centered.
So less focused on what you don't have and
Yeah,
more focused on what you do have.
exactly that.
Okay, that makes sense. What else? Are there other things we can do?
Oh, yeah, tons. Another big one is serving other people.
Like volunteering and stuff?
Yeah, that, or just, helping out a friend, doing something nice for someone.
Little things like that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be huge.
I like that.
It just shifts your focus from, your needs to the needs of other people.
So you're not so caught up in your own world.
Exactly. It reminds you that you're part of something bigger.
Okay, that makes sense. Is there, like, anything else that's helpful?
Even just listening to people can make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
When you really listen to someone, you're acknowledging their experiences, and that can be really humbling.
It's like you're putting them first, right?
Mm.
Instead of just thinking about what you have to say.
Exactly. And it shows them that you care about what they're going through.
That's good. I like that. So it seems like, humility isn't about doing these, like, big, crazy things.
No.
It's more about these, like, everyday things.
It really is. It's about making small changes to how you think and act.
And making those changes consistently.
Yep, that's the key.
So basically, it's like a complete shift in mindset, right?
It is. It's about letting go of your ego.
Yeah. And realizing that you're not, the center of the universe.
That's it.
So I guess we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Started with, like, this epic story of Satan's fall.
From, perfect angel to the ultimate embodiment of evil.
Yeah. And then we talked about, like, all those tough questions, free will, the problem of evil.
Weird stuff.
And we ended up talking about how we can cultivate humility in our own lives.
Right. Bringing it all back to us.
It's been, it's been a really interesting conversation.
It has. I've enjoyed it.
Me too. And I hope our listeners, got something out of it too.
I hope so. And I think, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that even a being as, awesome as Satan could fall prey to pride.
So we really got to be careful.
We do. We got to be aware of it and fight against it.
So we don't end up, making the same mistakes.
Exactly.
It's definitely something to think about.
It is.
Well, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It was my pleasure.